Good evening, everybody, and welcome on into our Final Fantasy podcast. And today is all about Final Fantasy X. It's part two. It's part two of Final Fantasy X. So, was it January? I think it was January when we had part one. And that was with Sweetheart Alley, Kane Highwind, and Panda Ramen Cat. And today we have Chris, otherwise known as Fenmeister, and Jupe, otherwise known as Jupe for Gaming. So welcome on in, Chris and Jupe. Thank you very much for being here today, guys. Oh, Chris, I couldn't hear you then. Could Jupe hear
Thanks
Chris?
for having me.
There we go. Now we can hear you. Awesome. Okay. So what we usually do at the start of the stream is we introduce our guests of the evening and their love of Final Fantasy. And what we will aim specifically for today is what it is that makes 10 one of your favorite Final Fantasies. So we'll start with you, Chris. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, what you do, and what it is that makes 10 one of your favorite Final Fantasies?
Sure. So I am Chris. I am the host of Geek Between the Lines, which is a podcast where we explore different geeky series. Now we're doing a read through of the Hunger Games, but we've talked about Star Wars and Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter and all sorts of other kinds of things. And I'm a huge gamer. And Final Fantasy's always been my main series that has meant a lot to me. Final Fantasy X is just always been a favorite. It's such a great game. I think it was the first game that really made me understand a system generation change, where Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9 were great on PlayStation 1, but Final Fantasy X really showed with the PlayStation 2 and providing voice acting and 3D worlds and just really kind of impressing me, young teenaged Chris, in a big way. And I think that the fact that it ended up having a sequel also kept me immersed. I had more things to keep me excited and moving me forward. As I've gotten older and I've returned to it, as I like to do on the podcast, I really love engaging with the narrative and the world building, seeing the theme inside the game. It kind of says, and the characters who experience it. It's just that I continue to revisit and love.
Wonderful. One thing I will say, Chris, is that your mic is sort of cutting out quite frequently, and I'm not sure if there's a way of you maybe just bringing it closer to you, or if it's maybe an internet connection issue. I'm not sure, but basically it just keeps cutting out a little bit. Jupe, how about yourself, sir? Could you please introduce yourself and what makes 10 one of your favorite Final Fantasies?
Yes, I am me. I am Dupe. I stream on Twitch. Stream a lot of Final Fantasy games. We just went through just last week. We finished Final Fantasy 13, the trilogy Final Fantasy 13. We finished Lightning Returns, so that's done now. And playing a lot of other Final Fantasy games as well. Although we'll be playing something Final Fantasy adjacent next with Chocobo Racing and Chocobo GP. But some Chocobo stuff. Which, I mean, we have in Final Fantasy X as well, and I like it in Final Fantasy X. I know a lot of people don't like it, like the Chocobo minigames. But anyways, Final Fantasy X for me is it is my third favorite Final Fantasy game, as I determined recently. It is the first Final Fantasy game that I have actually bought myself. The first game in general that I bought myself, like with my own money, was Final Fantasy X for our new PlayStation 2 when we got it, and it was great. There's a lot to say about it. I can talk about Final Fantasy X for hours, but let's maybe.
Well, I mean, we will be talking about Final Fantasy X for a couple hours, probably.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say to chat, you do have the option of asking questions to these guys. As usual, I have changed the channel points where you are able to spend just 50 points to put in a question for either Chris or Jupe, or both, everybody, if you wanted to. mostly aiming at Final Fantasy X this evening, but obviously you can spread that a little bit further because these guys are well versed in Final Fantasy games. The other thing I'm just going to point out now is I noticed that my chat that usually goes along the bottom of the screen is not working this evening, and that's probably due to API updates within Twitch, and I did not check before this evening. So sorry that you cannot read your own messages on the screen today, but we'll have to get past that. But yes, any questions that you do have for these two, please do throw them on through the channel points. And I will read them out through this evening. But welcome on in, everybody. We'll start with we've gone through the first question, so we'll get into the next one, which is who is your favorite character and why? And I'll start that one with Jupe.
Yeah. For me, it really comes down to Yuna at the end of it all. I like them all. I like all the characters, but Yuna, I think, is my take on it is that Yuna is the protagonist of the game, of the story. Tidus is simply the character you play as, but it's all about Yuna's story and everything. Even though Tidus is always like, "This is my story," but no, it's Yuna, and Yuna goes through, I feel, a really interesting development of the character, and even in addition to that, you get the feeling that there's more to the character than what you've seen, but yeah, it's the transformation going from the summoner who is just going to follow the teachings of Yevon to the T, to then as a kind of big moment in the game, deciding to go against it and deciding to forego the tradition of the final Aeon. So yeah, to me it's all about Yuna.
Did you do a Yuna only run on stream once? Because of your love of Yuna, or just for funsies?
No. Although, yeah, I mean that relates to Yuna. I was answering this more in terms of course, of story, but Yuna is also my favorite character, like gameplay wise.
Okay, good to know. Just wondering. And
Yeah.
Chris, what about yourself? Who is your favorite character and why? Oh, Chris has gone silent. Oh dear. Sorry about this hiccup this evening. We have had Chris's microphone has created some issues this evening already. We cannot hear you, sir. I'm not sure what change you made. Oh dear. He may have to pop off and on, which is okay. We can talk amongst ourselves. For those of you that don't know, Jupe has done some very interesting Final Fantasy X playthroughs on Twitch. Hence the question about Yuna. The Yuna, was that a skip? Was that a speedrun skip one as well, or was that a separate playthrough?
No, I mean I've not done like a proper speedrun of 10 at any point, but it was just like a challenge run, and I took it as as fast as possible in a way, but yeah, using the boosters and everything to speed things up.
Oh, like the summon boost things.
No, I mean the like 4 times speed.
Of course.
Thing, yeah.
I only learnt about 4 times speed the other day, and I thought there was only a 2 times speed, and then I watched some speed running on Games Done Quick, and they went, the first thing we're gonna do is 4 times speed. I was like, no, mind blown. All this time. Oh, I have a want to become famous bot in chat. Do I have a mod that has already banned it? They might have already banned it for all I know. That's just lovely. Thank you for asking if I want to be famous. We do have some questions that people have asked, actually, which are quite funny. Paul has asked, did you want to be a blitzball when you grew up? And Waking asked, was blitzball a good idea, or do you think Square Enix misread the audience? Interesting question, Waking. Jupe might have some answers on blitzball. Or Chris, if we can hear him again, but I'm not sure if we can yet.
Yeah, am I
We
back yet?
can, yes, we can hear you.
Yay!
Wonderful. Oh,
Sorry about that.
no, that's good. You sound good. You're not cutting out, so hopefully that's all good now.
Yes.
So let's go through your favorite character in Final Fantasy X.
Yeah, I'm actually in complete agreement with Dupe. It is Yuna for me as well,
Oh.
and Dupe said it exactly. She is the narrative agent, right? She's the one progressing the narrative in the game, and following her and what she's doing has always been something that I find not only compelling, but I'm more curious about her because she is someone, particularly in Final Fantasy X, who's so much more guarded with the way that she presents herself. And so learning more about what she's thinking, what she's feeling is something that every time I play through, I'm always keeping an eye on and keeping, really just feeling that curiosity for. But I also just really admire her strength and her kindness and the ways that she accepts responsibility with courage and with determination, and just the immense amount of strength that it takes for her to do those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of you. It is definitely her tale to be told. Okay, so my next question is which character you feel is the least developed and why? So not like your least favorite, but the least developed. Chris, can we start with you on that?
Sure. Yeah. For me, I think it's Kamari. Kamari, I think, is a really great character and very interesting, but he kind of stays in one zone the entire game where it's basically his only motivation is to protect Yuna. And he has a couple kind of changes where he finally starts talking to Tidus after being silent for a good portion of the game, and then we see his engagement with Biran and Yenke and the other Ronso, but he doesn't do much. He doesn't really have his own journey that we're following him on in the same way that a lot of the other characters do. So I think that's something that I would have liked to see more of, and then I think that the sequel actually does a pretty good job of.
I feel we're gonna have to talk a little bit about the sequel later because it's getting brought up a few times. Okay, and Duke, what about you? Who's least developed for you?
Yeah, well, of course, there's no denying that Kimari is not used in so much, as there's always like a character in every Final Fantasy that just doesn't get much, like Freya Amarant in Final Fantasy 9. But anyways, I thought that in addition to Kimari, though, I would say that there's a few others, in fact. And I would actually say that Lulu is one character that doesn't really get developed because I think Lulu's the character that's there to explain everything to Tidus and to the audience, to just be like the answer machine to everything. So you get the sense that Lulu's story has already been told. Lulu has already had her adventures before, and as you learn, there's only a few moments in the game where Lulu is actually like where there's a story about Lulu rather than anything else. And even those don't really push the character in any direction, in my opinion. So I think Lulu is a character that has a lot of screen time, for sure, but doesn't really develop anywhere. Doesn't really have like. She's there to tag along and answer Tidus' questions, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I love the character from a story perspective, but yeah, that's another one I'd say.
I mean, it's interesting to me with Lulu is that she holds a stuffed toy, and that is her weapon, is a stuffed toy. You feel like there could be a bit of some story behind that. Why do I choose to hold a Moomba from Final Fantasy VIII sometimes? I don't know, like, does she need to sleep with it as well? Has she got some issues there? Anyway, Dupe, which abilities are the best to unlock for which character in this game?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question because one thing I love about Final Fantasy X is the gameplay. all in all. And the character progression is also a really, really fun one because you have so much freedom about doing everything with your characters. And like if you're, well, for the question, it is mostly about like what if you're going through the standard sphere grid, what's on the standard sphere grid. That's what you get. But like if you're taking more freedom with where you're going with the characters, you can really really like customize your characters into whatever you want. You can make Lulu your hard-hitting front physical fighter if you want, or whatever you want. But generally speaking, though, there are a few abilities that are super powerful for characters, and maybe like there's the ones that are quite obvious later on, like double casting black magic and such is obviously like super powerful and everything. But one sort of, I'd say two. I have two like pro tips about cool ability combos. The first one for Yuna is that Yuna's sphere grid, we're talking about the standard sphere grid here. Yuna's sphere grid is filled with magic power, but doesn't have many like offensive spells. While Lulu's sphere grid is filled with offensive spells, but not actually that much magic ability. So when you get a black magic sphere, which lets you steal like some spell from somewhere, giving a damaging spell to Yuna is actually super great because she gets really powerful with that. And another one would be for Kimahri, picking throwing Kimahri in like Yuna's sphere grid and then picking Holy can be a really great idea for a particular fight in the game where you may or may not have to use Kimahri. So I think those are a few really cool abilities to get.
Good tips as well. That's very good tips. I always, whenever I've played it, I've never known what to do with Kimahri. I always think like which way to go on this. So yeah, that's brilliant. Chris, let's start talking about a bit of Blitzball, shall we? Do you think the idea of Blitzball is a take on Harry Potter's Quidditch? And how do you feel about the fact they encourage you to play this game and collect players for your team?
Yeah, this is a great question because I never really put the connection between Quidditch and Blitzball myself, which is funny because I do a podcast about Harry Potter. But I definitely see, these parallels where they're both these really great, fantastic visions of sport, where one is in the air, one is in the water, and that lets them do kind of these wacky and fun things. But when I was thinking on it, I don't really see them as really kind of at their core being that similar. And that's mostly because Quidditch is essentially a way that the narrative could give Harry more ability to be a hero, because the game is all about really one person who has the ability to score 150 points all on their own. And, for that story, it's really another way for Harry to do something spectacular. Whereas with with Blitzball, it really is about the team dynamics. Obviously, star player of the Zanarkand Abes, the Jecht shot, Tidus can do some great things there. But one of the things that you mentioned in this question is how, the game lets you collect players and really manage a team. It's not just about playing, but there's that kind of management element. And I think that being successful at Blitzball often does come about with, successful team management and being able to train up and find the best players for it. And so it really becomes much more of a team-focused thing than that kind of single-star player thing that Quidditch has. So I like the Blitzball. I've always liked Blitzball. When I was in high school, I would play it, all night, and even now I'll play it while listening up. I think it's a great podcast game to play and take a listen to. But it hits me kind of right where I live, because I love like tactics games as well, like XCOM and Fort Condor in Final Fantasy VII, and so having a more tactical sports game is actually kind of fun for me, where I don't have to worry about very quick reflexes as much as I do about how I want to create my team and things like that. I will say that I never actually spent much time collecting players though in the past. My first few playthroughs, I would mostly just stick with the Aurochs. I would just have so much loyalty to them that I'd just kind of keep that team and move them along and still be fine at winning enough games to get the things I wanted out of Blitzball. But this last playthrough, I did go to the internet, see which characters had the best stats. I picked up Miyu and Wedge and Brother, and I realized the game gets so much easier when that's the case. When you have these overpowered characters who are just Brother's just swimming around everyone in the pool, and it does make it a very different experience. But I like Blitzball. I like this different dynamic. I think it's a fun additional element to the game. I know that a lot of people don't like Blitzball, and I can imagine how those people get frustrated with especially having to play the one fairly difficult game in the game because you don't have that control over the team the same way. But yeah, I dig it. I like it.
And that was quite funny because Dupe reacted to the players that you choose. Dupe, when you play Blitzball, do you choose the same players? Is that like a known thing that you get those peeps?
Well, yes and yes to both of Chris's teams. I do also like to play with the Aurochs, partly for the challenge, but also those are there's those few names that you know that they are the good ones. Whether it's like this is the character that you can get really early on that is really good, like Wedge or Jumal from Luca, or then the ones that are really like the top players.
Interesting, very interesting. Okay, so carrying on with a bit of Blitzball conversation, Dupe, it replaces cards in this Final Fantasy. What achievements or items do you get by playing games of Blitzball?
Yeah, so I am a lover of Blitzball, if it's not obvious. So the greatest achievement is, of course, the satisfaction of playing the game. But you do get like the Blitzball is a game that you can safely ignore. Luckily for a lot of people, if you're not really interested in well, it's basically because it gives you Wakka's ultimate weapon as well as Wakka's overdrives. Those are the main thing that you can get from Blitzball. But there's also a bunch of other things that you can get through there, which may be difficult to get otherwise, or which just are nice to get through that. You can get spheres. You can get good like spheres to move around the sphere grid with. Friend spheres, warp spheres, such. You can get you can get some really bad items as well, like some consumables that aren't going to help you much, or like stuff like rename cards, such. But yeah, there's a bunch of different kinds of things you can get, but you don't really like get a lot of them, considering you only like get an item for winning the league or winning a tournament. So you're gonna play a few games, which is going to take quite a lot of time for you to be able to get something. So it's not really good for farming items necessarily, but yeah, there's a few good things, and specifically it's Wakka's weapon and overdrives that you want to get from there.
And do you think the Wakka's weapon and overdrive are worth the amount of time that you put in for that?
It kind of depends. Wakka is one of the strongest characters to use in like post-game super boss fighting stuff. And even like before that. So I would say that the weapon is not necessarily worth it if you're just doing a casual run, because it is quite the time investment to try and get it. But one thing that is worth it is attack reels, Wakka's second overdrive, which is the first one that you can get from the Blitzball game. So you will have to play a few rounds of Blitzball for it, but it is very much worth it because it is one of the most powerful attacks, or potentially one of the most powerful attacks in the game.
Very interesting. My next question is, which part of the storyline do you enjoy most? We'll go to Chris first.
Yeah, I really love everything kind of from home through the scene in Makalania after the wedding, with Tidus finding out about the summoner's death and that sacrifice, Yuna's wedding itself, the group resolving itself to go against Yevon, to go against the most powerful social force in their world, and Yuna and Tidus's romance scene, which is I think very bittersweet. In particular, I really love Yuna's wedding scene. I think it's a really great scene because, as Dupe and I were talking about, Yuna is such a great character, and this is such a great moment for her because she is in this moment standing up to a, strict, controlling social structure in Yevon. And as a wedding, I think it's also interesting because it's in a way kind of her standing up to the patriarchy, right? This kind of metaphor of her standing up against these controlling factors. Seymour's plan in this case is to use her to kind of make her into a tool for himself, right? Initially to wed her so that they can be the hope for Spira, which, helps him retain his power as a maester, and all of the maesters are men, unsurprisingly. But ultimately, he plans to use her death for his own gain, for his own plans, really trying to use her in that way. And so I think in this way, Seymour becomes almost like the personification of Spira's sacrifice of the summoners, where he is trying to sacrifice Yuna in the same way that Spira, which he represents as a maester, is trying to, utilize her and sacrifice her. And so while all this is going on, Yuna chooses to be at this wedding, right? She's not forced to be there against her will. She chooses to be there. So she's using and subverting her role, or the role that's expected of her, right? As this wife, this tool of Yevon. But instead she plans to use that opportunity and her own power to send Seymour to subvert their expectations. And maybe she would have been able to send Seymour if the rest of the group didn't show up and couldn't be used as a tool against her, for them being in danger. So yeah, I think that that's a really powerful moment. I like for what it represents, and I like the choice that she and the rest of the group make to continue the journey despite all of the costs, and to do what's right rather than what their society's telling them to do. I think that's a really powerful moment of that, and the romance coming out of that. Not only it gets my feels going, which is always great, but it's also I think a moment where they are weighing their personal desires with the responsibility to society, in really powerful ways.
Beautiful. I mean, the wedding for me is definitely my favorite part as well. It's just a big thing. Dupe, what about you? Which part of the storyline do you enjoy most?
Yeah, I of course also like everything, all of it. but like, yeah, those scenes are really great, and I want to say about the romance scene that what I really like about it is the fact that both Tidus and Yuna go on this sort of theoretical adventure of, okay, well, how about if we just stop, and what if we just go and leave all of this behind? And like, you have that super powerful moment where Yuna then still just like starts crying and just like it's just like, I can't do it because I have to do this. I have to save everyone. I have to I have no choice. I have to go out there. So that is a really great scene as well. But what I wanted to talk about was really the ending. I really like the ending of it. In general, I am a fan of less happy endings, and I think Final Fantasy X's ending is really great, because of the sort of bittersweetness of it all. As everything, like from when you get to Jecht and you go through the fight and everything. like from if we look at it from the point of view of Yuna again, you have Yuna having to sacrifice all of the Aeons, which is like these things that have first of all helped her through the whole journey, but also which are like important religious icons to the whole world, and Yuna has to just like go through them and just like kill them all. But then also having to lose Tidus and having to lose all of that, which I think is in a way really interesting because Yuna was ready to make like the ultimate sacrifice of sacrificing her life to save all of Spira, but instead she lives, but with a lot of loss, and the very very like ending speech of the game that Yuna holds is really great, the way that it goes, and the final moments of Yuna just like mentioning the dreams that have been lost and so on. So that is really probably the like my favorite thing about it, I guess.
Very nice. Lovely.
Yeah, I think this might be the best ending of any Final Fantasy game. I think that it's, for me at least, it stands up there. I think some other endings can have some really ambiguous parts that can be a little bit more hard to parse. This one is really just right in there with the emotional impact.
Yeah, I agree. I always forget Final Fantasy endings, but Final Fantasy X is one that I do remember, so that I guess is probably why it's easier for me to work out. Anyway, let's move on to the next question. Chris, what do you think about the theory, which is apparently confirmed, that Seymour's mother wanted to become a Faith to protect her son from beyond, wanting him to die so that he would earn acceptance?
Yeah, this a lot of this comes from the Ultimania, which was only recently published in English, but people have been talking about translations and things like that for a long time. But it's one of the ways that I think the Ultimania guide, provides a lot more background on Seymour that I wish was in the game, because it's really interesting and it makes him an even more compelling villain. Essentially, his father wed a human woman because he was trying to bring Yevon to the Guado. He was trying to, bring Guado into more mainstream society in Spira, and Seymour was a result of that relationship. But this wasn't a smooth transition for the Guado, and a lot of them resisted the idea of bringing Yevon in, and ultimately leading to Seymour and his mother's exile from Guado Salam. And so his mother understood that he was cast out of Guado society, and that he likely wouldn't be accepted in other elements of society, who are, as we see with the hatred against the Al Bhed, pretty nativist and kind of divided in that way. And she knew that she was going to die soon. So herself, as the only person who cares about him, she's going to die of an illness, and she decides that the best thing for him is to make herself into a final Aeon, into that Faith, and have him do a final summoning. And even though that would end in his death, it would also be the way that he would be accepted. He would finally have, respect of society, of every member of society, by, bringing the calm. And so the process through which this happens, and she does become a Faith for Anima, Seymour learns how the system works. He learns how the final summoning kills the summoner and becomes the new Sin, but he's still a child at this point, and he chooses not to go through with that, not to confront Sin with this final Aeon. And so eventually, when his father does succeed at bringing the Guado into Yevon, Seymour's able to come back. He becomes a priest and ultimately a maester once he kills his father and takes his place. And he takes his place in this hierarchy, and he starts having his own plan, and this backstory, I think, shows, why he has that plan, why he thinks that life is suffering, when he is cast out of society as a young child, and the only person who was able to help him in any way herself died, and why he thinks that the only end to suffering is then death, the death of everything. His mother taught him that. His mother taught him that she wanted his death to be the end of his suffering and the gaining of his respect. And so it makes more sense why he has these ideas, because ultimately you could say he has a similar goal to the party, that he wants to end Spira's suffering. He just has a very drastically different perspective on how to achieve that end. And so yeah, I think that his mother is an interesting character. He's an interesting character, and finding out more about that history in the game would have added even more to even though I already think that he's very compelling in what he's presented as in the game. More of this backstory I think is very fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have any words on that or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think Seymour's mother's story is really tragic. The way that it's kind of like Seymour has gone through the same story that our party in the game goes through. Gone through the whole pilgrimage and everything, and then gone over to Yunalesca and being like, "Hey, let's do this," and Yunalesca's been, "Okay, let's do this. Who's your final Aeon? Your mom? Okay, let's do it." And then after that, Seymour is like, no thanks. So that kind of reflects or mirrors Yuna's story, except that Yuna decides before making somebody into the final Aeon that, okay, let's not do this. And Seymour, of course, had a different motivation for it as well.
Yeah, it certainly gives me a whole new view of Seymour. So, I wouldn't have even thought or known of all of this stuff when I first played Final Fantasy X. And so to me, Seymour was just this, like a bad guy. And yeah, getting this extra bit of information really makes you think more about him as a person and the development of the character in the game. Paul has just written in chat, so Seymour sacrificed his mother for nothing?
And then he wants to become sacrificed himself, which he wants to fulfill those same roles, which so much of Yuna and Tidus's journeys also are about their relationships with their parents, and how much they want to remake those stories, and revisit those stories. And Seymour is a great antagonist because he's doing the same in reverse.
I guess really Final Fantasy X is very much about parents and their children. It is very just centered on that. I never really put those two together until now. Okay, let's have a look at my next question. It's another one for Chris. Each character has their own variation of a limit break, with Riku mixing ingredients, Wakka basically playing elemental slots, and Kimahri having options such as putting up a Mighty Guard. How do you feel that these limit breaks compare to other Final Fantasies such as 7 or 8, and do you collect them all?
Yeah, I typically do collect them all. I think that there have been some playthroughs where I just want to get through the story, and maybe, I'll just get attack reels, and maybe not put all the time into getting Auric reels. But otherwise, I think that it's a lot of fun to be able to collect the different overdrives, and I really appreciate how they kind of allow for different ways to show mechanically how these characters are leveling up, both mechanically and narratively, how they're becoming more powerful, where Wakka gets new skills by playing Blitzball. He's a Blitzball player, the more he plays, the more success he gets in that, the more that he can do. Riku collects items. She's, an Al Bhed. She has steel as one of her most important, and mix as her important skills. Auron calls back to his time when he was alive and his past, and revisits those to gain power. And Tidus just practices. He just does it a whole bunch and gets more and more skills. And so I think that it's cool because it's a way of letting them all have their own both mechanical and narrative engagement with the world in ways that they get stronger, and it gives the player some variety in the ways that you are trying to level up your characters and make your characters more powerful. Where either in the same way that the crests give you so much variety in the kind of tasks you're able to do, this is another way that you can explore Spira in a multitude of different ways.
I'm going to quickly ask Dupe, do you collect all of them?
Often yes, sometimes no. I think it's actually really cool, the point of the narrative element of the overdrives. One thing I wanted to mention about overdrives is that they are practically the only gameplay difference between the characters, actually, since every character can be made into anything in the sphere grid. The overdrive is basically the only thing that differentiates them, except for Yuna having the ability to summon Aeons as an additional thing. But yeah, that's like one of the only ways that in the end the characters differ from each other, and why Lulu is the worst character from a gameplay perspective.
Oh, poor Lulu. Okay, well, my next question is, which is your favorite summon and why? We will start with Dupe.
I have to steal away with Anima, of course, because Anima has, well, the cool backstory is a fun part of it, but also, like, from the perspective of the game, of the story, it's really cool that you get to see this like super powerful Aeon early on in Luca when Seymour brings in the monsters and everything, and then defeats them. Yay, Seymour is the hero. But also of course, just because Anima is just so powerful, being the overdrive is if I remember correctly, in the like most recent version, like the international release, Anima's overdrive is the most powerful attack overall that is possible in the game, because of its multi-attack. And yeah, just generally when you get Anima, the Aeon is really powerful. So it is. Yeah, I have to pick Anima.
And does that mean Chris is going to also pick Anima, or do you have a different option?
I do have a different one. For me, it's Ixion. I really like Ixion. I've always kind of liked like lightning and thunder. I always picked Jolteon with my Eevee for Pokemon. Like that's just something that I think I enjoy. But I especially like him because he starts with haste, and having the ability to cast that so early is always a lot of fun. And so when I think of Ixion in my mind, I think of a hasted version of him, like nodding his head up and down. Like that vision comes to my mind so clearly. So that one's my favorite, I think. But I do remember, one of the things I remember most from my first time playing the game many years ago was the first time seeing Ifrit's Overdrive, and just seeing every single step of his destruction, and feeling like, what more? What? This is ridiculous. Like ultimately just like throwing the entire ground up in the air and then shooting this giant fireball at them. Like it's absurd and amazing. And so I have to give props to that just for the animation and design of that. But my personal favorite would probably be Ixion.
Wonderful answer. We have just had a raid from Cerulean Knight. Thank you so much for the raid and welcome on in, everybody. I was actually just about to remind chat, if anybody has any Final Fantasy questions that they would like to shout out at Chris or Dupe this evening, I have a channel point redemption that is only 50 points, so you should automatically have access to it. Feel free, thank you for the shout out, Tomato. Feel free to chuck a question at either of them. It can be to one in particular. Just throw the questions on in there. And thank you very much for bringing your party over. You were playing Uncharted 4. I really need to play the Uncharted games. I'm so far behind on those games. So we were just asking, we were talking all things Final Fantasy X, and we were just talking about our favourite summons and why. Now we're actually going to start moving on to other things, such as speed running. So, Chris, Final Fantasy X is a game that speedrunners hate. You can't skip the cinematics, and there are a lot of them. Instead of focusing on the negative of this, do you think it's impressive and great that a game released in 2001 had so many fully voiced and animated cutscenes?
Yeah, I certainly do. I probably don't. I've never played a speed run of something. That's not really my gameplay style. I can imagine how frustrating this game would be with all of that voice dialogue compared to especially earlier Final Fantasy games. But I do really think that that is such a crucial element of this game. Certainly was for my experience. You know, I mentioned up top how for me this game helped to kind of solidify how console generations can lead to you know big advancements, and for one of them for this was the fact that it was fully voiced, that these characters who I was spending this much time with had a voice and had that kind of personality. And I think it especially is interesting considering the limitations at the time in regards to animation and how that affects localization, because the dialogue that is written in English has to match up with the voice, the mouth movements of the character's mouth that was created for their Japanese dialogue. And so it's a whole different aspect of how they go about that localization, and how they bring that to the English version of the game, which you know at times leads to some awkward dialogue. It can make the laughing scene seem a little stilted, but you know certainly once you think about it from that perspective, it becomes I think a little bit more understandable. I remember one of the things that I remember the first time I realized like, oh, they never say Tidus's name in the game because you can change his name, which you could still do with Final Fantasy games back then. And so they had to do all these things around it, calling him New Guy and all these other ways of being able to talk to him without using his name in that way. And so yeah, for me it's interesting to think about these the kind of different like design hurdles that come with fully voicing a game, and this being one of those early examples of a console game, certainly a Final Fantasy that has those, I think is really impressive. So sorry to the speedrunners. I take it as a positive overall, but that's certainly me.
I do remember thinking it was quite impressive at the time, having all of that, and obviously being the first voiced.
Totally, yeah. I do want to share one story. Oh, go ahead, dude. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I do think that Square the small indie studio could have maybe tried to figure out back then a way of maybe like having a skip but a skip button on those cutscenes, because it's for I remember somehow reading about it that it's somehow like hard coded in the game, that it's really hard to create even in like a current version. It is really difficult for them to implement any sort of skip, which is annoying. Even though I don't speedrun the game either, it is annoying if you're just like, if you just want to do like a quick let's play a little bit of Final Fantasy X and let's just like play to do some like gameplay, and then there's some long cutscene with Tidus and Lulu talking about the backstory of everything. So I can kind of understand the pain.
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
I think it is one of the longest ones for people to speedrun. You just can't really cut the time down as much as you can with every other Final Fantasy. Chris, what was the story that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so my not this playthrough, but the one I did before this was actually the beginnings of the pandemic, and I was feeling kind of bummed, and I was like, you know what, I want my melancholic Final Fantasy. That's what's going to kind of cheer me up, and it really did. It really had a profound effect on me, and so I was texting my brother about how much I was enjoying this playthrough, and my brother works at Insomniac. In the narrative department there, and he was currently working on Ratchet and Clank, which stars Jason Arnold Taylor, who plays Tidus. And so at one point, I get an email with a short 30-second message from James Arnold Taylor in Tidus's voice, basically saying hi and that he appreciates I love the game. And he was an amazing class act. Not only is it great that he did that for a fan, but he was like, he did the laugh scene. He's like, oh, I thought that's hilarious. Ha 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 ha. And he was talking about like different pronunciations of Tidus or Titus, and like he was like clearly engaged with the fan discussion about the character and the game. It was such a cool thing for me to get. It's still something I treasure having, and just a cool thing for him to do.
That is a very cool story. I think we're all a little bit jealous now.
I was flabbergasted when it happened. It literally, like, I couldn't sit down. I was like, this is the coolest thing. I've spent so much time with this game. Like, to have that was, it was great. It was cool.
Yeah. Relating to that, I love the fact that James Arnold Taylor voices a lot of characters, like in the Clone Wars series, voices Obi-Wan Kenobi and everything, and has different voices for different characters. But then you have Tidus and you have Ratchet, and they are basically the same voice. So it's always confusing playing Ratchet and Clank and being like, huh? Wait a minute, what's Tidus doing here?
That's so true.
I just want to say welcome on in, Mr. Clappy, as well. Thank you very much for the raid. What was Mr. Clappy playing this evening? Could please do a little shout out for Mr. Clappy, please. Welcome on in. We are talking all things Final Fantasy X. If you have any questions about Final Fantasy X, chuck it in the channel points redemption below, and we will read them out later on. So my next question is for Dupe. Do you fight the Dark Aeons? Please explain a little bit about what they are, where they are, and how you go about fighting them.
So, do I fight them? Usually not. Usually I don't really bother. They were an addition to the international version as sort of the super bosses on top of the super bosses. And I mean, they are really they are the tough ones. They are basically. I think it was talked about last time in the previous podcast, the sort of lore backstory of the Dark Aeons and everything. But basically, they are there to hunt down the player's party. And they are just very, very, very tough versions of your Aeons. And they appear mostly they appear in places where they can kind of block off some of your old areas, like the Dark Valithor, for example, is in Besaid and blocks off your entrance to the village. So you can't get back in there if you missed something, unless you defeat Dark Valithor. But the way that you fight them is there's basically two ways to fight the Dark Aeons. The first one is to level up and get strong and really like learn what the mechanics of each Aeon is, because they are slightly different, all of them. Though generally speaking, the strategy at the end of the day comes down to grinding until you're powerful enough to defeat them. But the easy way out is to, of course, pay your best friend Yojimbo a few coins. And Yojimbo, having the ability to kill anything in the game in one hit, also kills the Dark Aeons, and there's no problem with that. You can just wipe them out with Yojimbo if you want.
How
With
many
a little bit of luck.
coins? How many coins does that usually cost?
I mean, there's difficult mathematical calculations depending on what answer you've given to Yojimbo at the beginning when you've recruited him and all of that. But you can do it from anything from 1 gil a pop to giving Yojimbo a few 100,000 gil if you want each time. But yeah, you can also just give 1 gil and try to get lucky and just reload if you want to do that.
Toss a coin to your Aeon.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Yojimbo is the answer to everything. If you've got a problem and you can't really like figure it out, then just calling Yojimbo and it's fine.
Did I see that he's gonna be in Chocobo GP? Did I see a Yojimbo in Chocobo GP?
I don't think so. I think you might have seen a picture of Gilgamesh.
Oh,
He
that's
looks
the
a little
one.
bit similar.
That's
yeah,
the
similar
one I was
in that
thinking
one. Yeah.
of. Yeah, good point. Pluzis just asked, is this where your pronunciation of Janimos from Stardew comes from? Yes, I call Janimos in Stardew Jojimbos because I struggle to say Janimos. So I always call them Jojimbos, and he's just like, why are you saying Jojimbo? And that is why. I am so sorry. That's what happens. And Paul is saying that Yojimbo is in 14. You should check it out. Yes, Paul. So always, I need to always play 14. So, my next question is another one for Dupe. What is the incentive? Well, it's for either of you, really. What is the incentive for completing the monster arena? What items do you get from it?
So for the monster arena, that is actually one of my least favorite things relating to the celestial weapons. Because you need to complete the whole monster arena to power up Auron's celestial weapon fully, and that's a long grind, having to defeat 10 of each monster in all of the areas in the game with capture weapons on, so you couldn't even have started it like early on or anything like that. So yeah, it relates mostly. Again, you get from completing those area conquests and species conquests, as they're called. You get a lot of good items for like customizing your weapons and armor and mixing for Riku and all of that. You get those rare items, but the big thing here is, of course, again, the celestial weapons. So you get Auron's celestial weapon maxed out through that, and you also get Yuna's celestial weapon to begin with through that. You get the Nirvana weapon itself through the monster arena by just doing a little part of it, and then you also need another little part of the monster arena to be able to then unlock the Maga Sisters summon from the Bevel. No, the Requiem Temple, Remium Temple over there. So yeah, those are the main things: Nirvana, the Blossom Crown, and the Mars Sigil.
It can take so much
Chris.
time.
Go on, Chris.
Just it can take a lot of time, and it's also getting like the cactars, getting 10 of those, because it just takes so long to even encounter one, and so you are just spending hours fleeing battles that you've already captured all of those things, and the AP's not really, the experience isn't really worth it, and so just waiting to get the one monster that you need, and then a cactar runs away before you can capture it, and it's just such a headache. So yeah, definitely one of the hardest and most time consuming ways of getting weapons.
Yeah, although I guess one incentive to do it as well is to get those area and species and original monsters that it creates, because those are the main way to getting like to really those like Dark Aeon defeating levels, as you can farm some powerful bosses there for very very powerful items, and of course defeating one of the super bosses in the game requires you to complete the monster arena to be able to fight it first.
Which one's that, Dupe?
Shiryu is the final original creation that the monster arena owner creates for you, which is an interesting fight because it forces you to fight underwater, which means, as we all know, nobody else can fight underwater except for Tidus, Waka, and Riku. Riku for unknown reasons, Tidus and Waka because they are Blitzball players, so they can breathe under the water, but Riku is there because
all Albets can breathe character underwater. That's my thought.
I don't think so, because Riku does wear some sort of like diving suit. uh,
Oh, there you go.
in the
Paul
beginning
has
of your
said
game, and
Riku
also
uses
when you get.
Machina. Something to do with the Machina, and the others don't
Yeah, I
use
think
Machina.
I always took it as she like had just had a lot of experience doing dives, like to try to find new machina, and that's how she kind of built up that skill. But who knows?
Yeah.
They needed a third character.
It's weird. I remember when I was young and played it, I actually did do the Monster Arena. I would never have the patience now, but I do remember doing all of it so that I got Yuna and Oren's stuff that was necessary. And then I definitely never did the Dark Aeons. Okay, so this is for Chris, can you explain the ties between Final Fantasy X's final boss with the parasite Yu Yevon and the in-game religion of the same name?
Yeah, this is for me something that's really compelling. I'm a historian. I teach history, and so the idea of how history is understood and the way that institutions kind of use memory and ideas, and how that changes over time, I think is really fascinating. So I think that this is a really cool but very complex and convoluted part of the lore of the game. So essentially, 1,000 years ago, what would create Sin is when Bavel is winning this Machina war against Xanarkand, and Yu Yevon is this summoner, probably the most powerful summoner, and he decides that, understanding that Xanarkand is going to be destroyed, essentially, he refuses to allow this to happen, and he convinces much of the population of the city to become faiths. And using those faiths, he will summon a dream Xanarkand. He will summon a city that is a version of Xanarkand that he hopes will live on forever. This dream version of the city, which is where Tidus and Jecht come from. But to isolate this dream Xanarkand from the rest of the world, he also creates this new weapon out of pyreflies, an armor out of pyreflies, which is Sin. He armors himself with that, so he's kind of inside of Sin. And to protect the city and also kind of for revenge, Sin destroys every other Machina city in Spira and continues to attack any new significant population that rises up in the world. His daughter, Yunalesca, is the first High Summoner when she turns her husband, Lord Zayon, into a final Aeon and uses that to destroy Sin. But Yu Yevon at that point, and I'm assuming Yu Yevon is destroyed alongside or perhaps his physical body is destroyed alongside Sin at that point, but he is able to possess the final Aeon of Lord Zayon, the Zayon Aeon, and he does so and turns that into a new Sin after taking a few years to kind of rebuild. So over, centuries, every time a final summoning takes place and a final Aeon destroys Sin, Yu Yevon then becomes a parasite, possesses that Aeon, and that turns that into the new Sin. The religion Yevon is then built off of a kind of an incomplete understanding around these actions and this history, because most people have no idea where Sin comes from. But they worship Yevon as teachings against things like Machina, because they see that Sin is attacking Machina cities, and he's attacking cities that grow larger, which often comes because of technological prowess. So even though the Maesters might know the origin of Sin, they keep the eternal nature and the reviving nature of Sin outside of the knowledge of the general populace, and just use those teachings to try to continue to control the people of Sira. So 1,000 years after this begins, Yu Yevon is essentially at that point an unthinking parasite who just is continuing the cycle of living within Sin, ensuring its rebirth, and continuing to attack things without any kind of particular malevolence, just maintaining this status quo. But the religion Yevon is very divorced from that original person. It's really more focused on using the ramifications of the destruction that came with Yu Yevon's final acts to help them maintain control of a society that is so precarious because of the destruction that comes with sin. But you know, I think that this is something that I definitely didn't understand my first few playthroughs because it is so interesting, but it's a way I think for the game to also kind of really highlight how Yevon itself is not a like the religion Yevon is not an ally, and that it is in some ways tied to this final boss of Yu Yevon, but in other ways it is as institutions have done in our society, it interprets the past, and it interprets its teachings in ways that are best going to serve its present historical context.
Amazing.
Sorry, I'll take my history professor hat off now.
That is the best description I have had to finally understand that question. Because, it just messes with my head trying to work it all out. And you got it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for putting up with it.
Brilliant.
Yeah, excellent explanation of the situation, and I really think it's an interesting thing to kind of learn in the game as you play through it, that the Yevon that you've kind of thought of as one of the factions that is trying to fight sin is actually kind of created by sin. So yeah,
very interesting. It is very, it messes with my head, this Final Fantasy story, but you're helping me get my head around it. So moving on from that, let's talk about the hardest boss fight in Final Fantasy X. Jupe, which one is the hardest boss fight in Final Fantasy X, and how would you go about killing them? What do you get for killing them as well?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because you can interpret the question, what's the hardest boss fight, in many different ways. But I think the most like objectively hardest is of course the like final super boss of it all, called Penance, which you fight after you've fought all the Dark Aeons, and of course there's a lot of other fights that are super hard in the game. But that's the like biggest one with the biggest stats and everything, and what that basically means in terms of fighting Penance is that because it is brought up so like over the top to the max, you don't actually have that much room for any sort of creative strategy. There really is only like a few ways you can defeat Penance. And there's like just a certain kind of gameplay loop that you have to go into to fight the boss, because you can't there's only so much room in the sphere grid. You can fill it out, but even then you're not strong enough to just like defeat Penance by just going in there and having fun. You gotta follow the rules of the fight. So it requires you to become, it requires you to basically max yourself out, and then and then like really figure out how to win. But of course you also have option number 2, Yojimbo, as always. But yeah, as with these sort of ultimate super bosses in all the other Final Fantasy games, you don't really get anything from it, other than the satisfaction of winning. And I'm actually not sure. You might get some achievements on consoles or Steam or such. I'm actually not sure about that.
No, I didn't know about that myself. Do you usually fight Penance?
No.
That was an outright no. Chris, what about you? Do you fight Penance?
I do not. Most of the times I played this was through the original game. I kept my PlayStation 2 around forever so I could just replay this on and on. But I remember when I first got the HD remaster, which is the first time that it was available in North America to fight the Dark Aeons and some of these other bosses, backtracking to try to get the Jex Sphere in Besaid, and then fighting Dark Valifor and getting clobbered with it. And just being like, okay, yeah, how much time am I gonna have to put into grinding to get to the level where I can even stand a chance here? And even when you get to those levels, from what I've seen, a lot of it is still depending on RNG of like how your luck stat is going to match up with the luck stat of these things, and your ability to hit them is itself kind of not something that you can guarantee. So yeah, I've never been able to put the time into it. I actually started when I knew I was going to be on this podcast. I was like, you know what? I'm finally going to do it. I'm going to replay Final Fantasy X, and I'm going to do everything. So I can talk about whatever I need to talk about. And I still couldn't have gotten anywhere near close to it. I just didn't have the time to invest in that much grinding.
No. Same. Chat. Chat, please can I ask you if you have any questions for these guys, please pop them into the channel point redemption. It just says ask a Final Fantasy question. It's 50 points. If you have anything, aim it at us. Paul is surprised that neither of you said Yunalesca.
Yunalesca is a really hard like story boss because she uses both zombie and automatic death. So I actually really like that boss because it makes you have to be clever. Kind of what Dupe was saying earlier, how other bosses you kind of only have one way of doing it. Yunalesca, you really can be clever and figure out how to balance a team that will be able to survive her regular attacks, but also survive these automatic deaths by having zombified versions or Aeons or whatever else is. So that's definitely one that has taken me a while and is particularly difficult because there is a very long cutscene that you can't skip right beforehand, which has definitely given me some frustrations in the past. But yeah, that's a good one to bring up.
Actually, if we're starting to talk Yunalesca boss fight, one thing I love about the fight is not actually the fight itself, but the two boss fights that precede it. The fight against Seymour, one of the Seymours. I don't remember the name of the boss fight, but the one.
Gagazet. Yeah,
the Gagazet Seymour. After murdering all of the Veronsos, except not really. So because in that fight you learn about. The game kind of teaches you in that fight against Seymour. It teaches you about zombie and full life combo because Seymour likes to do that to just like wipe somebody out. So it gives you a kind of tutorial on that sense in that fight, and then the fight against the Sanctuary Keeper also gives you a bit of a tutorial preview of what the gameplay mechanics are that come into play in Yunalesca's fight. And in Yunalesca's fight, these mechanics are put together and kind of brought to you again. Like, okay, you've learned it now, so now you can do it right, and then you die, and then you try again.
That's really astute. I never really thought about it that way. That's very, very smart.
Gecko has said Dark Anima is arguably a really hard super boss. Agree. I mean, I just can't do any of the dark ones.
Yeah. As I said, there's a lot of hard bosses in this game.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Do we feel like there might be more difficult extra bosses in this than other Final Fantasy games? Because you've got all the Dark Aeons. I'm just thinking, are there other Final Fantasies that have that many?
I mean, it's up to where, like, what is your threshold for super difficult boss fights? But I think yes, because you have all the Dark Aeons, you have Penance, you have the Monster Arena, which is already pretty much like the original. All the original creations are like difficult super bosses. You have a Omega weapon, all of those. So yeah, it definitely has a lot of boss fights. Probably the most.
It's like, I mean, like, yeah, it's all the extras, all of the extra, not necessary bosses that are very difficult. It's very interesting. So Gecko says 10 probably has the most. Only one I think comes close is 13-2. Jupe can think on that one because he's been playing through those. All right, so I'm just gonna have a look and see what questions we have had from chat. Now, bear with me because my phone doesn't like to show it anymore. So we've Cerulean actually asked quite a while ago, who is your favorite Final Fantasy VIII summon, which was when we were talking about the summons of 10. You're welcome to answer that question, either of you.
Well, I was lucky enough to be on 8 with you a few months ago, and I talked about how I liked the lightning summon then too, which is Quetzalcoatl. So yeah, clearly I've got a theme going on.
I mean, for me, there's the I don't know, because for me the Guardian Forces have always been in Final Fantasy VIII have been a very passive thing. I barely ever use them in gameplay because I've learned how to break the game otherwise. So why even bother with them? But I think one my favorite probably would have to be Odin as a kind of pseudo summon, uncontrollable one, because of the cool kind of story relation there, and then becoming, well, I count Odin and Gilgamesh kind of as the same in that, and then becoming Gilgamesh, and specifically becoming Gilgamesh from my second favorite Final Fantasy game. So
Paul's written Doom Train, and then Gecko's done Shiva with an orgasmic face. My other question that I've had so far from chat is from Waking saying, was Blitzball a good idea, or do you think that Square Enix misread the audience? So how do we feel about the idea of Blitzball? Was it a good idea?
I dig it. I think it works. I think also, I don't know. I can't speak for, was this a good idea generally for kind of, was it a sound strategy in regards to making this game popular? The game was clearly popular. So I don't know. I don't think I know anyone who plays the game for Blitzball, but I don't see anyone who plays 8 for Triple Triad either. Even though I think that that's typically considered one of the best of those kinds of mini games. So
yeah, I do think it's quite interesting how you've had all of these card games in all of these Final Fantasies, and then this one they're like, we're gonna go Blitzball, we're gonna have lots of fun with a ball instead of cards. That's gonna get the kids interested. Just change it up a little bit.
I mean, I like the fact that they actually tied the minigame to the story, though. It's hard to say which came first, the chicken or the egg, but having actual integration of the thing into the story is cool, because I like it when everything's kind of integrated into the story as well. Which if I may, I can go a little off topic from that question into another thing about Final Fantasy X that I love.
Go on.
Thank you. I like, in comparison to some Final Fantasy games where you have in this era of Final Fantasy, you had vocal themes in the games, and in this one it's Suteki Dene, and in what I really like about that is that it is from the point of view of the story. It is from the point of view of Yuna, and it really works when it plays during that scene, because the song talks about wanting to wanting to go to see Tidus's city and wanting to live that other life, but then not being able to.
Lovely.
Soundtrack is great.
I'm just reading a little bit of chat there. Paul says, I don't mind Blitzball, but having to play it for Whacker's Celestial is tiring. What else? Oh, Gecko said, I always took it as Odin. Oh, so this is Final Fantasy. I always took it as Odin dying and Gilgamesh appearing through the void and taking Odin's sword for his own. Yeah, I seem to remember that. Okay, so we've got our last few questions. Gecko's just chucked one in. We'll read that in a minute. Thank you very much. If anyone else has any questions, do exactly what Gecko just did. Go into the channel points and chuck it our way. So, Dupe, I believe you played a Yuna-only run of Final Fantasy X. We did touch on this earlier, but how did that fare, and what are some of the other challenge runs that people do with Final Fantasy X?
It went well. It was actually surprisingly interesting. I chose Yuna specifically because I thought it was going to be the easiest one of the single character playthroughs, because Yuna is the most powerful of the characters, having access to all the Aeons, basically gives that. So it was actually really interesting, and there were actually a few interesting gotcha moments there. Like one of my favorites was before Macalania Temple, when you fight the Albed Machina. I actually got into a problem there. Otherwise, the game had been pretty surprisingly easy with just Yuna. But there was a little bit of a problem, because the Machina has the anti-magic field that is created by the little bit thing that flies, and it flies, so Yuna's normal attacks can't reach it. So you have to have some sort of a thing that is not magic, but is an ability that can damage something ranged. So I had to kind of ponder through that, and then decided to backtrack through the whole sphere grid back into the center and pick up Lancet, which I should have just picked up right away at the beginning, so that I could actually defeat that, so I could actually defeat the boss. So that was a cool moment, as well as learning that there is a potential way, if you like in a normal playthrough, you would never be able to not defeat Yu Yevon in that final battle. But I actually had some problems, because if you only have the one character, and if they are not super powered up, and in that situation when you have no Aeons to call upon, you might actually end up in a situation where you can't deal enough damage to Yu Yevon, and it just heals through all the damage you do. So yeah, it was fun. I can recommend it as a challenge playthrough. I might do some others for single character runs, but other really one really big category of challenge runs is the new No Sphere Grid run. I've never tried it myself. I've watched a few runs of it, but it is basically the classic Final Fantasy challenge of not using your progression or not using your equipment or whatever it is in a Final Fantasy game. So it really hampers you down when you don't have basically any progression from the beginning. You only have kind of your ingenuity and creative ways of using your items and everything. So it is a really interesting challenge run to do. But then, you can think of all sorts of different challenge runs, whether you want to do it without any summons, you want to do it without any overdrives, stuff like that. Like you can just stack these together however you want. You can even play a game where you never play Blitzball, which was actually part of my Yuna playthrough, and I was sad about it, not being able to play any Blitzball.
Aww. Let's go through some questions that peeps have asked in chat before we do our final few that are aimed at both of you. So, Gecko asked, what was the moment that made you feel most invested and wanting to get to the end of the story? We'll start with Chris on that one. I mean, think on it.
Yeah, I think that it was entering Xanarkand, the ruined Xanarkand, and the callback to the opening cinematic of the game, and then also it being, realizing that their battle music wasn't coming on. And that they just maintains that mournful background music as you go. It just for me really made me want to push forward and really made me want to kind of come to the end, and it's also a time period when this characters are thinking that they're coming to the end and they're talking about we're getting to this choice, this decision that we have to make, and we want to find another way around it, but we can't think of how, and so it just kind of built up this really it's really strong kind of pull forward for me. I think the game as a whole has amazing pacing. I think that the first few islands run through pretty quickly, all the way through Luca. Then you get a little more of an extended period on the Mi'ihen High Road, leading up to Operation Mi'ihen, which is obviously very destructive. Then you start going through these places that I think are really interesting world building, in Thunder Plains and in Guadosalam, and then you have that big twist, and afterwards this slow movement through the Calm Lands and Gagazet until you get to Xanarkand, and then it just becomes this kind of just amazing, pull factor for me. That I think always is what I think of as the thing that propels me forward the most.
What about you, Jupe?
So this question is a little bit problematic because it was 21 years ago that I played this the first time, so I don't remember. But I mean, what I do remember is the fact that before this, I had played 7, I had played 8, I had played 9, and as said, I bought this game myself. So I was already invested before I even started the game. I was already sold on it. So pretty well. As far as I can remember, the first FMV of Tidus playing some blitzball, which of course, like when you first see it, it's like, wait, what are they doing? They're swimming in a sphere. What? but it's cool, and you've got some cool music playing, and the whole scene is of course like interesting when Sin appears and everything, but also back then it was incredibly good looking, even though if you now roll in the original PS2 version on like a screen of that era, you'll be like, but back then it was like, whoa.
Yep. The next question comes from Rish. Has anyone completed the entire game? Is that even possible? Can you 100% this game?
You can. It just takes a long time.
Yeah,
I go ahead, Dupe.
Yeah, I think there's no nothing in the game that you couldn't like 100%. So yeah. It takes a long time. Like my standard save length for this game when I'm playing like a really like completionist run is like 100 hours when we're talking about like no boosters, no speed boost. So yeah, it takes a long time.
I definitely, I think I 100%ed everything that was on the original North American version of my PS2 back in the day. But the North American or the HD remake, too much new content.
Plus has just written, wow, that's nearly 20% of the time I've spent on Dota. Thanks, Plus. So Rish has also asked, what do you think of the music in Final Fantasy X? That's a really good question. What do you guys think of the music in Final Fantasy X?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, I mean it's great. It's amazing. It's very, very good. Uh I think that the every time I hear one of those songs, it automatically takes me to the place that it's in. Like they're so tied to those locations and so good at building those and then building up the tension and the tone of the game in such amazing ways that yeah, I can't imagine this game without that soundtrack.
Yeah, it is amazing. Um, it is Final Fantasy X has I think the longest soundtrack of the series up until that point. Um, and yeah, it's overall really really great. It's got really really great songs in it, great nostalgic memories, of course, but in general as well. Um, but what I would say about it is that I did like last year. I went through all the Final Fantasy soundtracks and kind of just gave them all a listen and thought about what are my favorite songs of each game. And in Final Fantasy X, I noticed that I first listened to the songs and then checked them out on the wiki for the credits, and I noticed that the songs that I liked were all Uematsu songs. So as this was the first Final Fantasy where Uematsu had some help from three or four other composers, you can definitely see that it is a different kind of soundtrack, and I like them, except that I think the Prelude version in this is terrible. I've always thought it, and I found it funny that HPAM loved it at the beginning of or before we started the
I think
podcast.
it's fun. I think it's a fun take. It's totally different to all the others. Yes, it's cheesy, but that's why I find it really funny. I think it's definitely a good introduction to the podcast, don't you think? All right, let's move on to the questions I've got as well. So we're coming to our final few questions, which are for both of you. We'll start with Chris. Are there any negatives to this game in your eyes?
Yeah, this is actually a good transition because I would say the first thing that comes to my mind is the metal song in the beginning of the game, which I don't love generally. It's not my type of music, but in particular, I don't love it as one of the first moments of the game because I just don't think that it fits with the tone of the game and where it's going to go. I think that the opening cinematic for sure does, but that song it just doesn't it doesn't really fit right with what I think the world of Final Fantasy X is and should be. I think that it does become powerful again when it comes on when you're fighting Jecht, but at the end of the game. But I think that its use at the very beginning just is something that I always am bugged with, and it's something that I've had to tell some people like, don't worry about that. The music gets better, if they're playing for the first time.
Mm. Jupe, what about yourself? Do you have any negatives in this game?
Um, it's a super hard question for me because honestly, I was thinking about it for so long and I was like, no. I really honestly I don't have that much bad to say about it. Like um there's just so much good, so much good about it that it is really hard for me to think of anything. But I think the two things that I wanna highlight is first of all, I do need to reiterate that Lulu is the worst. I I I love how great Lulu is as a character, and then how bad she is as a playable character. But also, in addition to that, I do have to give Final Fantasy X a minus point for just absolutely sidelining Moogles. just having Moogles be just like one stuffed animal toy weapon for Lulu is just, it's horrible.
Oh,
They should have figured out a way. I'm willing to sacrifice the Hypello. No riding the Shoopuf. Ride the Shoopuf Kupo? That would have worked. That's what I'll say.
I just hear the pain in your voice when you just say how it should have had Moogles. Rish is...
That actually...
Oh, sorry, go on, Chris.
No, that point about the Moogles kind of made me start thinking about just like, representation of different species, beings in the game, and I do think that that's one thing they could have done better on as well. They clearly want the kind of animosity towards the Al Bhed to be a crucial part of their world building, but I think when they also have Guado, when they have Ronso, which almost get genocide committed against them, like there could be a deeper engagement with the ways that those kinds of structural inequalities exist, and that kind of racism and engagement exists, that I think they have the room for, if that they could have explored a little bit more. But that's more of a missed opportunity, I think, than a negative for the game.
Yeah. Yeah, Rish was saying, I agree with Jupe on Lulu. However, I hate Tidus's blitzball skills. Okay. Thanks for that, Rish. I mean, I think a lot of people like Lulu. I like Lulu. I like that I can accessorize her with different plushies. I like her large collection of belts. And some people like her for some other things she has. So, I think Jupe might be one of the few that dislikes Lulu on their screen.
No, again, I need to reiterate. It's not that I hate Lulu as a character. Just gameplay-wise, just in battle, Lulu is trash.
Oh,
Which ties to Moogles being sidelined.
Hello, Crosis. Crosis also likes her large collection. Yes, Crosis. You see, I like her double cast. I mean, I always like black mages, so I'm probably gonna like that in general. So makes sense. But anyway, our next question, Crosis. If you have any questions that you would like to ask either of these two about Final Fantasy X, please do chuck them in the normal way. Redeem it in the channel point. What are your overall thoughts? Oh, now here is where we talk about 10.2. We finally get to this. What are your overall thoughts on 10.2? And do you think people should play it? Please, could you explain the difference of playing 10.2 to 10? Either of you could start, whichever one.
Go ahead, Dupe.
I love 10.2. It is great when you don't go into it expecting Final Fantasy X again. It's not the same game at all. Like the gameplay difference is definitely big. Like for me, Final Fantasy X, something we haven't mentioned at all. Final Fantasy X's like gameplay mechanic, the combat system, is to me like the peak of the Final Fantasy series. That was the best combat system in the whole game, whole series. In 10.2, they make it real time, which I like far less, and you instead of changing characters, you change outfits. You change jobs basically mid combat, which is actually kind of fun compared to like the previous time you had a job system in a game with Final Fantasy V, where you could change your jobs. But just outside of combat. This time you can kind of dynamically do it during battle, which I assume is what led to Final Fantasy 13. but yeah, I really like the game because when you go into it and you just sort of accept that, okay, this is going to be a little bit more like lighthearted fun. With these characters, you get to have a fun experience, but also you get a continuation on pretty much everything in Final Fantasy X. Some stuff that I don't think needed necessarily to be concluded, but things that really are really cool. And again, got to talk about Yuna and say that it is great to see how they like brought a new side of Yuna in that game, and gave her again a lot of great character development in the game, and depending on your ending, also slightly different kinds of development in it.
Yeah, I also love 10-2. It's honestly one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. I don't think that it is as good as Final Fantasy X. I think that 10 has just especially a better narrative that it's giving, and it is able to engage with that in really, really profound ways. But personally, I really, really enjoy 10-2. I actually disagree with you, Dupe. I love the gameplay. I remember the first time I played the demo of it that came with the PlayStation official magazine that I got specifically because I wanted that demo. And playing and doing trigger happy with R1 while I'm attacking with my other characters blew my mind. I was like, this is amazing. This is taking these elements of Final Fantasy and making it more active, because even the ATBs of 7 and 8 and 9 I felt like were so much less active than this, and so I really dug that. I also like 13's combat, so maybe it's just a different play style that I appreciate, but I think that generally 10-2 is great because 10 is in so many ways about the a massive change in the way that a world is structured, and about resisting the forces that tell you that the world is just as it is and that it can't be changed. And ultimately, that is overthrown at the end of 10. And then 10-2 is about what comes next. What comes after not only these individuals that we spent time with, but society as a whole starts to think about how to develop their own agency, what they want to see out of their society, what they can build when they don't have structures in place that stop them from doing so, whether that be a patriarchal system in of control in Yevon, or a giant whale that destroys your village every time you get more than 20 people living there. I think that the ways that there are new ideas and competing ideas on how people are going to build that world is really fascinating. And it also lets people experience joy in a time that in a way that they haven't before. I was just telling my partner who's not a gamer. I showed her the opening cutscene of 10-2, and just how dramatic a shift it is from Final Fantasy X, but in large part that's because, now they can go to a concert and just have fun listening to music in a way that society couldn't before. And Yuna gets to experience new ways of exploring her own identity, exploring what she likes, how she wants to spend her time outside of the constraints of a society that, gave her so much responsibility. So I like that. I like the messiness of the world post the saving of the world, and what it looks like afterwards. I think that the big bad in it, and the kind of that journey isn't as engaging, but I think that the relationships, like if you really care about the people in 10-2 is a great game to continue to see their development, what comes next for them, and so I love the game. Though I also, look back at it in a way that there's some elements that are pretty fan servicey and pretty things that would be definitely not, I think, created the same way in 2022 for good reason.
Yeah, yeah, and like I really like in general games when or sequels when they like have some sort of time skip to it, and they really explore like how society has changed from what it was. So it is really cool in that sense to see it all. And what else was I going to say? Oh yeah, the journey really feels like a continuation in a way, because it starts you off with this sort of really harsh difference to 10, whether it is the concert at the beginning or even like Yuna's character, who like Yuna seems to suddenly be really like aloof and not really care about anything, and it's just like whatever, I'll just look for these spheres, but then eventually like kind of regaining herself and being like, okay, well, I guess I'll save the world again.
Which, as a 19-year-old, I buy that. She's discovering who she is as her own person.
Definitely, yeah.
Very interesting. Very good chat about 10-2. Paul has written, I love the 10-2 job system, but the story and gameplay is icky. And Rish seems to be realizing that he's old and says, when Yuna sings, I got chills with that, although I love the fact they shifted music in Final Fantasy X and continued that onwards in 10-2. So I don't believe Rish is as big a fan of the soundtracks of 10.
I think the soundtrack in 10-2 is I would call somewhat more forgettable than in general than 10. But it is good, and I mean it reuses a lot of stuff from the previous game. But I do have to agree that well, not the first song is not as like amazing to me, but I do really think that the song in the Thunder Plains, 1,000 Words, is really good, because you get that you get that feeling of the parallel story and everything, and it's a really good song.
Croesus has just said the drastic change of Yuna in 10 to Yuna in 10-2 is too far-fetched in my opinion. I like 10-2, but I feel like they demolished her character to fit a narrative. Ooh.
I disagree with that a little bit with Croesus there. I think I can buy Yuna's character in 10-2 at the beginning, like the fact that she is so different in a way, because it's like, well, she's just like 2 years ago she lost like a lot of things that she loved, and she has to like figure out new things to do and new ways to live, and like I think because the game gives you in 10-2, just like in 10, it gives you the internal monologue of the character, which is really great. I think Yuna explains, being sort of without direction, not really knowing where to go, because you got to remember that Yuna has, up until the point in 10, Yuna has lived a life where she has known from pretty much the very beginning what her path will be and how it will end, and she has known that she will die very young once she's done this pilgrimage, and then suddenly she doesn't die, and she needs to figure out what to do with life. So I buy it.
Yeah, that's true. And Rish is also agreeing, saying, imagine having all of the weight of the world pulled off of you. How would that change you? And then Croesus said, oh, I would dress completely different and become a singer, obviously. Yes. Okay, so our last question of this evening, if anybody else in chat has any other questions to chuck in, do them in the channel points command. Our last question is, what would you say to convince someone who has never played Final Fantasy X to pick it up today? Chris?
Yeah, this is actually the game that I recommend most, in particular to people who haven't played much Final Fantasy at all. And I think that people who play Final Fantasy have probably played Final Fantasy X, so I think most of the people are people who aren't as familiar with the series generally. But yeah, I tend to say that the battle system is pretty approachable, that it can get some intense, some complexity involved, but that if you just kind of want to do surface level engagement with it, you don't have to worry too much about having a high level skill coming into the game, which I think can be really attractive for a lot of players. And I basically say, yeah, that it's a way of seeing a amazing story and really, really good storytelling, where how a video game can be a way of presenting a fascinating and powerful narrative and character development and world that I think for me is up there with many of my favorite novels, TV shows, movies, and everything else, and what I think about when I think about the stories that have most moved me. So yeah, that's kind of how I would sell it.
Very nice. And Jupe?
Well, Chris basically stole the words out of my mouth in the sense that yeah, this is also also for me the game that I recommend anyone who hasn't played Final Fantasy before to start off with, because it is approachable in many ways compared to because I don't want to recommend them anything like past 10 as the first Final Fantasy necessarily, because I feel like they don't necessarily represent the older games so well. So I feel like this still has some representation of it in a sense, but what this has over some of the older games is that it has graphics which look more palatable to someone who might not want to look at Final Fantasy VII's polygons, and also the voice acting, which is something that can turn some people off if they just have to read everything in a game in modern times. So the voice acting, even though it can be a little cringy to some people at some times, it really helps with that, and it really helps you get into the characters as well when you can just kind of sit there and watch the movie as it happens.
Yeah, I mean, I always assumed it would be like Croesus has just said. There was a reason it was the most popular Final Fantasy in Japan, and yeah, I think the voice acting, being the first one with voice acting, and having so many cinematics, it's just immediately something that a broader audience than previous Final Fantasies would be just able to take in and play as a game as well. Okay, so what else have we had saying in chat? Rich says, I too tell people to try Final Fantasy X first if they haven't experienced the franchise. The story is so good. And then says that Final Fantasy 12 and up are meh. Well, Rich, I actually quite like Final Fantasy 12.
You don't like the game, you just like Fran.
I do like the game. I do like the game. Fran is awesome, but I actually like the game.
Me too.
It's a good one. And actually, on that note, I'm not too sure what our next podcast topic will be, because what we normally do is an Easter quiz. Now, at this point, I need some quiz people. I need some people that are willing to have my hardest questions thrown at them and see who comes out on top. So if anybody is ever interested in joining us on any Final Fantasy, whether it be a quiz podcast or just a normal Final Fantasy podcast, do let me know. You can contact me in all of the places, all of the Twitter, the Discords, on Twitch and Whispers. Just get in contact with me. Because if we don't do a quiz, technically 11 is next, which will be very interesting because I don't know anything about 11, but I do know some people who do. So that would be a very interesting topic to go through. And Paul in chat is immediately in capitals. 11 is amazing. Thank you, Paul. So we will see. I will either find some of you people out there in the world and get you in. I'm thinking of the quiz topic to be solely on Moogles. Yeah, Moogle themed quiz. Yeah, Jupe might be interested. Jupe might be a little bit interested in that one. But yes, if anybody is interested, do let me know. Do get in contact. Even if you just have some questions of Final Fantasy that you would love to throw at people, just send them to me whenever you think of them, and I will keep them on a sheet for future. So, on that note, we will now say our goodbyes to everybody. So, Chris and Jupe, we'll start with Chris. Could you please explain to everybody, and you can put links in chat as well. I'll permit links in chat of anything you've got, saying what you do, where you're found, and yeah, when.
Yeah, so the best way to find me and the work that I do is through my podcast, Geek Between the Lines. So we are a podcast that explores geeky ideas and compelling ideas and themes in geeky properties. Right now we're doing a read through of The Hunger Games. We're about to finish the first book, but we've also got a large back catalog where we look at themes in Star Wars and Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and Avatar: The Last Airbender as well. So we do lots of fun stuff there. It's a great show. We have new episodes every Tuesday, and you can find us at bit.ly/geekbetweenthelines.
bit.ly/geekbetweenthelines. Oh, I missed an E. bit.ly geekbetweenthelines. Go there, guys. Go there. Hopefully that worked. Yes, I know, Paul. I know. And Jupe, yourself?
Yeah, I stream here on Twitch on this platform we are here on right now. Except if you're watching this on YouTube. Yeah, I stream. I stream different games, but a lot of Final Fantasy as well. And you'll probably find me playing a Final Fantasy game like most of the time. So yeah, we just finished the 13 trilogy, which I have a lot to say about, but this is the Final Fantasy 10 podcast, so we just finished that, and as said, the next one is, of course, because the big release next week is Chocobo GP. I'm going to be playing that. Gotta play the Chocobo GPs and watch the Chocobo story unfold. But after that, we get back to another Final Fantasy game, which I have not told anyone straight out yet, which it is, but I have only said that it is related to Final Fantasy 13. Yeah, that'll be that, and yeah, other games as well. Completely unrelated to Final Fantasy and JRPGs.
We will have to get you back in for the Final Fantasy 13 podcast, because I don't think there's that many that play all three of the Final Fantasy 13 games. So that will be a very interesting one. And yes, I'm also looking forward to Chocobo GP. This Thursday, isn't it, that it comes out? So
Yep.
I will have to have a look on my Switch on that day and see what I can play. But thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Chris and Jupe, for joining us. Always wonderful answers. Really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody in chat, for your questions. This will be going up on YouTube tomorrow, and also across all of your podcast places that you can listen to it. Thank you very much for joining us. And as I said, DM's always open if you want to take part in any future ones. Thank you very much, and we'll see you all soon. Everybody say bye!
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.